Ayaka here, and Alyssa is also here tonight. We are TAs with the LSAT Unplugged, and welcome to the admissions session. And today we are going to do an essay review session. We don't do these often, once every month or so. So, if you're listening to the recording, we will hold these occasionally. So, if you want your essays to be reviewed live, feel free to drop your essay with Steve. You could drop it in admissions at lsatunplugged.com, and we will kind of try to get through some of them. So before we actually get into an essay, I really wanted to talk through how Alyssa and I look at essays. We've been looking at essays for quite some time, and we've seen about well over 100, and we've given feedback on well over that. So we really want to kind of show you and talk you guys through the methodology that we use for when we look at a essay. So let me share my screen here. Let's see, here we are. Do we all see that? Yeah, all right. And hold on, let me just pull, let me just pull the chat out. So just give me 1 second. Alrighty. So really when we look at an essay, we feel like, it goes through many phases, many stages, and we've kind of organized the essay writing process into 5 stages. So stage 1, a lot of that is, thinking about the topic. A lot of times people here are saying, I have the idea in my head, I just have to put it down on paper, or they've got the hook in their mind, they know how to write that hook. That's really, it's trying to get that idea onto paper is stage 1. In between stage 1 and stage 2, you're going to write your first draft. That is your first draft, and really that's when the essay writing process actually starts and takes a tangible form. Stage 2, we're looking at overall structure, and when you ask someone to read a essay in stage 2, it's you're going to be making huge changes from draft to draft. You might be cutting whole paragraphs, you might be cutting the essay in half and flipping it, and all of that. So these are when you're going to make those big structural changes to your essay. Stage 3, you're looking at structure and content. So the structure kind of settles down a little bit, but you might be looking at, do you need to add extra paragraphs here? Can you kind of trim certain things? And you're really looking at the overall flow of your essay, along with kind of paying attention to stylistic choices. There's some people who really want to write with, echoing examples, or like connecting the first paragraph to like the fourth paragraph, all of that fun stuff. So you're really looking at that structure there. Stage 4, it's really when you're close to the end, you're settled on structure. All you have to do is really kind of go through and look at style, grammar, word choice, stuff like that. And in stage 5, you really want to zoom out and look at your essay in relation to your application as a whole.
I'm gonna, what I just realized about stage 3 is, Ayaka, a lot of times someone will ask us to take a look at their essay, and they'll give it to us with the language that sounds like, I'm turning this in tomorrow. Can you give it one last look? And anybody that's listening to this, you really don't want to be giving anybody an essay or anything to look over, especially if it's their first time seeing it and their first time getting to know you. You really don't want to do that the night before, because you're not even on the same page, most likely, in terms of like what your whole application looks like, who you are as a person. So that's really something that I find a lot of people are doing after a few drafts. But what I really wanted to talk about was the structure and content, which is stage 3. And like a good example of that, I was trying to figure out, when Ayaka, you're going through each stage, what does each of those stages look like? And something I know that happens more than once with structure is, say somebody is trying to talk about an aha moment and it happened to a neighbor, a family member. The essay will start out and the hook will be about a family member or about a neighbor, and that'll take a while, and then they'll start talking about themselves. And something, Ayaka, that you and I, after looks and looks at the essay, we most consistently pretty much suggest to switch up the structure, to have the applicant talk about themselves, talk about maybe who they are, and maybe say it was inspired by something. And really, what I'm saying right now is not applicable to every single story, but that's what we're talking about in terms of structure. Like, are you going to tell someone else's story and bring it back to yourself? Are you going to speak about yourself? Maybe talk about where that inspiration comes from, and things like that. So those are huge structural changes that can change the pace of an essay.
Yeah.
It can change the centric themes, and that sort of story. So that's what we're talking about in terms of stage 3. And you can see that even after you do that, there's still a lot more work to be done.
I agree. And I think a majority of the essays that we see, they're ping-ponging back and forth between stage 2 and stage 3. Absolutely normal. Alyssa, you've seen my essay and it's gone through an iteration of, the sticking in stage 2, and then we kind of went to stage 3, but then I'm like, oh no, I want to switch it around. And so it happens all the time. It's not a value judgment on the essay itself, right? It's not this is good, this is bad. It's more, you are in a process of getting your essay to a great place. And I know I said this at some point earlier this week, where a lot of times people fall short in writing their essay because of time, and direction. Like, what is the direction that you need to take your essay? And it's hard to figure the direction part out. Time is something that I think is a little bit more controllable by the applicant, that you have to give yourself time. If you're not willing to give that time, then you're going to fall short.
When you talk about direction, I'm really thinking about a lot of essays that I've read where somebody is trying to make a point, maybe of like multiple hardships or maybe like many things that they've been through, and they kind of bring up example after example. And it's tough as an individual person because I almost don't have a full grip on exactly which of the stories is the most powerful or paints the most positive portrait of me. They all happen to me is all I know. And so that's where it gets kind of tricky, and you have to have somebody else who's invested in your story, in your voice, figure out how do we pick the best examples and focus the direction. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, a lot of people, they write their first draft, they do a couple edits, and then they're like, what do I do next? And that's understandable. We haven't, outside of writing for an undergrad application, you don't do this sort of writing. And how to make it, and usually if you do, it's very private writing, like you're writing in a diary. So how do you make a personal story appeal to someone who is not you, appeal to someone who doesn't know all the details in your life, right? Because odds being the person who is reading this essay for the application doesn't know who you are. So you have to be mindful that you need to fill in some of the story. You need to use a story that's a little bit bite-sized, because it is a 2-page story and it's really hard to put 20 some years into 2 pages. So you don't want to do that. So when you get to after the first draft, after a couple drafts, how to move forward, that's a really hard place to be by yourself. And so you really do want other people looking at your essay and giving you direction. But a lot of times we get responses to review, like essay review of like, oh, I think it's good. Oh, I think you're almost there. And in reality, when you take a look at all the elements, are they meshing together in a cohesive story and a compelling story? A lot of times it's not the case. And that's not a writing skill issue. That's not a person issue. It's, we're not used to this kind of writing. Most people are not used to this kind of writing. And how do you write for an application? It's just a muscle that we haven't learned, we haven't used in a while. So I think that's kind of what I see when I think of direction. I think you're absolutely right. We want to talk about all these stories that have happened to us and that we've participated in. Not all of them are applicable for an application to law school. So that it, as well, is included in that direction part. Hope that makes sense.
Nice. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So this is really what we're looking at. The majority of times we're seeing essays in that stage 2, maybe a stage 3, but that's kind of rare. I've never seen any essay that has come our way that is beyond a stage 3 and that just really needs a polishing. A lot of times people are really stuck in that stage 2, stage 3, and need help getting out of that. So hopefully the essays we reviewed today, I want to do a little bit of a deeper dive into each essay, so we'll only be looking at 2, but hopefully that will give you a little bit of direction. And when you look at your own essay on what to look out for. So moving on, first is going to be the personal statement. I will read it out loud. It's a little bit long, it's 4 pages, and then I'll go through some feedback. Alyssa, I would love to hear your feedback as well, and we can kind of talk it out and see where we can take this essay. So, personal statement. It seemed like yesterday I received an email from New York City College of Technology informing me that my degree in human services was ready for pickup. I was so elated. As challenging as the process of furthering my education had been, perseverance motivated me to never lose sight of my goal. During my undergraduate studies, I was a full-time mom, a full-time student, in addition to completing a part-time internship, and at one point navigating the complexities of the homeless shelter system. There were many days that I was unsure of how I would be able to continue my journey in my professional development. Despite my challenging circumstances, I learned to be resilient and I learned to hold myself accountable. Completing undergraduate studies was a culmination of a journey of learning and discovery. This was not only a symbol of a completed journey, but also a journey begun. It means so much to me as a woman of color who was raised in New York City Housing Authority, an underserved community, to be a voice and advocate for my clients. I knew that I was deeply passionate about meeting the real needs of people in all their humanity and recognizing when populations have been oppressed or excluded. As a domestic violence advocate for Safe Horizons Crime Victim Assistance Program, I work directly with the precinct as a social service arm, providing direct support services to survivors of crime. Safe Horizons Crime Victim Assistance Program focused on a client-centered practice approach. Safe Horizons provided a protected space for clients to make decisions that are best for them. Although survivors of crime can be impacted by similar victimization, it is important to remember that each client has a different set of needs and there is no one-size-fits-all approach to working with survivors of crime. As an advocate, it is imperative to ask a survivor's input and inclusion in the criminal justice process. The client-centered approach respects and reflects a survivor's autonomy, privacy, and most importantly, their confidentiality. Survivors deserve to make informed decisions without coercion. As an advocate, I have had the capacity to really assist clients with identifying their immediate needs and ultimately meeting those needs in addition to prioritizing their safety and well-being. I'm compassionate about my clients and the work that I do. There's nothing more rewarding than making a difference in someone's life. I spent many nights working beyond my schedule to help clients obtain resources. I am my own harshest critic. It is because of this that even when I exceed expectations, to me, it's not merely enough. Despite the great work that I have done, I know that I need to do more. I need to become an attorney. I want to be an attorney because I want to be able to advocate for people that are underserved and marginalized. It is imperative to me to use law as a tool for social change. I want to be able to provide legal support and be the voice for my clients. There are so many people that have been negatively impacted by the racial injustices of the criminal justice system. I want to empower my clients and, most importantly, challenge the racial injustices of these very same criminal justice systems. As a former domestic violence advocate and now crime victim assistance program manager, I've had the capacity to often navigate the complex bureaucracy of the NYPD system and also support the team that I supervise, in addition to supporting survivors around the system as well. As a former survivor, I know what it feels like to feel powerless or hopeless and defeated. This has further contributed to my desire in wanting to be an attorney. As an African American woman working in the precinct environment and working on behalf of survivors, I recall a day working in the precinct and the verdict was announced that an officer was terminated as a result of killing an unarmed African American male. I had to take a step back and check in with myself and reflect and ultimately speak with my supervisor about what I was feeling. It was very challenging to hear some of the responses from the police officers. While working with a precinct environment, I learned to experience professional tolerance for opinions in which I do not agree. Each time that I see something or hear something surrounding racial injustice, it makes me even more driven to become an attorney. As a lawyer, it is important to hear the other side and at times engage in those challenging discussions, especially surrounding race, racism, and equity. CUNY School of Law promotes public interest, which is really the field of law that I idolize. It is my dream to attend CUNY School of Law because CUNY School of Law values and promotes diversity and inclusion in every aspect of their school. CUNY School of Law fosters college and community which represents CUNITY. It is so important to be part of a community where so many of the people are like me. It is so important to feel a sense of belonging. Diversity also means that there will often be a difference of opinion. As someone who has the capacity to work in precinct environment, I have developed a professional tolerance for opinions in which I do not agree. CUNY's School of Law, CUNITY, really is supportive of diversity and even engaging in those very difficult conversations surrounding race, racism, and equity gracefully. What I admire most about CUNY School of Law is that they provide a supportive environment for their schools or for their students, which is extremely helpful in navigating the rigors of law school. It is my dream to attend CUNY School of Law. As an African American woman living in an underserved and marginalized community, NYCHA is not unusual to see a significant number of police officers policing my community. This has been extremely alarming and ultimately leaves residents in the state of fear. Residents shouldn't be fearful of their community because of the overwhelming presence of law enforcement professionals. There have been a huge prevalence of over-policing in many communities of color and even an abuse of power and authority amongst minorities. It is my desire as a legal professional to address the misconduct of law enforcement professionals and ensure that law enforcement professionals are held accountable for allegations of misconduct that have been substantiated. It is my dream to be a future student at CUNY School of Law and participate in the Defenders and Equality and Justice Practice clinics to ensure that all humanities, despite race, ethnicity, or creed, are treated as equally and fairly and receive proper legal representation despite economic status. It is important for me to be vigilant and vocal and really address the issues of racial disparity amongst African American and people of various other communities from a legal perspective. I'm committed to changing the criminal justice system in the aspect of mass incarceration. I am driven to successfully contribute to the Second Look project to give clients another chance to reintegrate into society. Mass incarceration is still existent and disproportionately affects the African American race more than any other race in the United States. A number of events from this past year, the countless murder of Black men and women, often by systems that are meant to protect, the way that COVID-19 pandemic has disproportionately affected communities of color, have only worked to strengthen my resolve to be a part of the solution and make positive change. All right. So in kind of reviewing this essay, I'm going to ignore the grammar part.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because I have a whole page of notes that I was taking while you were reading this out loud.
Mhm.
And something that I find, so I have a whole page of notes that I was taking, and I've spoken to some admissions officers, directors of admissions that say, I'm not the grammar police.
Mhm.
And I've spoken to other admissions officers that have specifically mentioned grammar as being as important.
Yeah.
So there are different ways that admissions officers definitely address that. But I have a whole page of notes, and I think what's really interesting is that I thought, okay, what if we speak about this in terms of the phases?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
We're
And that's
gonna
kind of
start from
where,
there.
okay, yeah, that's kind of where I was like, let's ignore the grammar. Um, in that, even if we fix the grammar now, because we're going to need to cut, edit, all, and add new content to the at least this essay, I think it's a moot point to work on grammar. Um,
For example, I just want to let people know too, because I know when I first started looking at essays, it's like learning how to cook. I thought I wasn't really sure what spices go together. What do I say first? Like, what do you put first down in the pan? Like, is it like the garlic, or is the garlic going to burn? Like, some people say, like, it was very confusing to me in terms of like figuring out where to start with an essay. And so if anybody's listening in on this, and I know what Ayaka means when she says, I'm going to ignore the grammar and some of the smaller things right now, and we're going to take a look at just the topics. For example, like even word choice, there are conjunctions in here.
yeah.
Residents shouldn't be, that shouldn't could be changed to should not, which actually changes out the amount of syllables and slows the reader down.
Mhm.
But there are other word choices in here at the very beginning of the essay where it says, I was so elated. And you want to take that word out, I would suggest, because I'm typically not saying elated in a day-to-day conversation with Ayaka. So it's like there are some word choices that are too formal and slow the reader down for no reason. It's too many syllables to say elated, and it's not really something you'd probably say. And then there are other words that are conjunctions. So like that sort of grammar, that sort of word choice, that happens a lot throughout this essay, but that's an example of what I think Ayaka means of we're not even going to talk about that at first,
Mhm.
because if we were to fix all that, there's still other things. So we're going to start what you're going to talk about now.
Beautifully put. Thank you, Alyssa. So I would squarely put this in stage 2. There's a lot of content here, which is great. You have 4 pages of content, which means we're going to have to cut, which I think this essay needs a lot of cutting, pasting back, and kind of trimming down a lot of these stories. Alyssa, where would you put this in the stages?
I would absolutely put it in a stage 1.
Stage 1.
Because there is no focus on the topic. This is it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall. It's like saying everything that is important to the applicant. And I have a feeling if I was talking to the applicant right now, which happens a lot, somebody says back to us, I wrote everything down and I don't know where to take it. So this person to me looks like they've written a lot of different things down. And well, a personal statement cannot be 6. Did you say it's 4 pages?
4 pages.
And a personal statement, for as far as I know, cannot be 4 pages. I'm sure that the applicant is well aware of that. So they've written a lot down and they're trying to figure out what sticks. And so for me, there has been no decision on topic or content selection. And that's why I'm still at stage 1.
Okay, yeah. I can see that. I think for me, this essay, I feel like I know where they want to go. There's a lot of other stories that are coming in that's just, as you say, it loses focus.
We have the story about the working
Yes.
for the Safe Horizons Crime Victims Assistance Program. We have the story about there's a violent occurrence where they have to take a step back and check in with themselves. We have mentions of race, of them being I think they said a person of color, but I think this person is African American. They also identify as, or I could be incorrect. I'm so sorry.
This person identifies, I believe, as African American in the category of people of color.
We
Also
have race,
worry about getting their degree.
getting their degree. We
Yeah.
have a mention of homelessness.
Yes.
So if I'm talking about focuses for an essay, there's been so far 5.
Yes.
And and we have the mention of the school, why I want to go to this school, bringing in I think it's pronounced C Unity, but I just made that up in my head.
Sorry, I just don't know how to pronounce this, so I'm just going to spell it out.
If anybody listening to this right now, please jump in. We have the mention of the school, which is a 6th thing. And so I can see what you're saying. I mean, it doesn't really matter if we think it's 1 or 2, but the fact that I have like 6 things in terms of what they brought up and how those can all be separate essays, that's too much for a personal statement. No matter what, no matter who you are, 6 different like focuses or is too much for a personal statement.
I agree. And I think the one thing that I do commend this person on is having the line of advocacy throughout. It's through 6 stories, which is too many stories to track, but clearly this person wants to be an advocate for people.
I agree. I think it's a great asset to have. I've heard someone describe it like this before, a server's heart. I picked up on, there is a line where the author of this essay said, I've stayed many late nights. And I just kind of thought, well, that sounds interesting. I would love to hear about one really late night that you are working on something really, really tough.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this person should, because there's a lot of different things to talk about here, but they absolutely could paint an entire essay surrounding this really tough night where they had to make a tough decision. They had a particular maybe like client or someone that they're working for. There was a story that touched their heart, because for me, if I hear a story about one late night, I can deduce reasonably that that person is a hard worker, cares, has an advocate heart, already is working in a line of work or volunteering or working in the assistance. I'm so sorry. I'm butchering what they actually did in that. And maybe you do talk about that violent matter and how you had to check in with yourself, but this author skips over that.
Yeah.
Both of those, skips over the working late at nights and skips over sort of like this moment where they have an internal dialogue. Even that moment of the internal dialogue, the whole essay could be on that. And we would deduce that this person's thoughtful, hardworking, advocate.
Yeah. I agree. And I think this essay is really stuck in that touch on a lot of things lightly, whereas we're asking for deeper thought, deeper expression of what's going on, of a few things, right? The light in many, it only tells us that you've touched a lot of things, but it doesn't tell us how this person has grown, how this person has learned. And it's just, it's a little bit too much information coming in that almost diminishes the impact of the one story. It's like when you wear pattern over pattern, it diminishes the effect of the pattern. So you don't want to do that.
I agree with you. And I think the reason you're saying it is because this person is impressive. And I don't want that to get lost in this conversation. I know that you're thinking it too, because I talk to you all the time and I know what you think is impressive in terms of this. Like, this person is super impressive. Sorry, I'm just like talking for you right now. But if I were listening in on this and I was hearing us talk about, okay, there's way too much focus going on, this person needs to go in depth. A lot of times there's like a screech moment of like, well, how do I go more in depth in a story? And if you're thinking that right now, that's the hard part. That's what makes an essay good. And that's what takes a lot of thought. So that's why a good essay is a good essay, because it's not easy to do. And my first recommendation for this person would to be absolutely delete every single part of the essay that talks the way that you could speak in a resume. And there's enough of that where if you deleted all of it, you would then like kind of clear some of the weeds, because this person put so much in, it feels like it's at a standstill. So immediately get rid of that resume. And it happens, I think, in the it happens at the end of the first page. There's a paragraph, it says, as a domestic violence advocate for Safe Horizons Crime Victim Assistance Program. And then it lists off what they did, what their role was, and it lists off how to do the role. And I love that. And that can shine in the resume. But something I've heard before, and I do stand by it, is that you really don't want to take time in your personal statement to just say what your role was, because a lot of this listing off and what follows, what this person is explaining what they did, all I'm learning about this person is that they know how to do the job. An example of that is at the beginning of the second page. No, it's still at the end of the first page. At the very end of the first page, it says, as an advocate, it is imperative to seek a survivor's input and inclusion in the criminal justice process. That is a sentence I would highlight. Oh my gosh, Ayaka's highlighting it for me. That is a sentence I would highlight and say that could be on a job board posting. That just means that you know how to do your job. And if anybody's listening to this, you don't want to just show that you know how to do your job, because it's assumed that if you worked there or that that's what you were doing and it's on your resume, then that would be assumed that you're good at your job. What we could do is take that sentence and tell a story of when you seeked a survivor's input and inclusion, and you are seeking their input and their inclusion in their own process. You could tell a whole story about that and delete everything where you talk about how to do your job and tell us a story about how you did it. That would be clearing the weeds. That would be the first thing I would tell this person to do.
Absolutely. I think you're right. And, a lot of times people get stuck in their essay because they've written a laundry list of what they've done. And this is close to that, right? A laundry list and an explanation. It's almost like they took their resume, made it into paragraph form, and they put it here. So we don't want to do that. You can get a lot from a resume. What the essay is looking for is more of a deeper look that you usually wouldn't put in your resume. So not to say that just because you've mentioned that you were in a domestic violence advocate for Safe Horizons, like that, just because it's mentioned here doesn't mean you don't have to put it in the resume, or because it's put in your resume, you can't have that title in the essay. Rather, we want to know more. Exactly what Alyssa said. Like we understand the day-to-day, it should be in your essay. We want to know about that one impactful moment, that encounter that has shaken you to the core, all of that, like more real moments, more human moments that occur when you're working in these really high stress moments.
I almost feel like that's where I would tell the person to go. And I would just like almost stop there in terms of their feedback, because they need to delete everything that talks about what they do. And what's funny is that we've had this feedback before, and I don't know if this author will do it, but I can almost anticipate a pushback from an author where, for example, they might say, but saying something like that makes it look like I'm good at my job and like I would be a good attorney. And if you write that that's what you do on your resume, and say there's a bullet point under there and you say, seek survivors' input and inclusion in the criminal justice process, by reading that on your resume, and that's the job you're doing, I am assuming competence. I'm assuming that you are good at that job. already. And if you tell a story of when you did that instead of telling us all about it, that is more powerful. So I've heard it before, the pushback of, well, don't you want to know that I know how to do my job? Actually, not really. Like we want to hear a story about something that happened. If that's the story you want to tell, if that's not the story you want to tell, absolutely delete it.
Yeah. And I hope that, you know, not this person, but if you're writing your essay and you're writing about a job, it's a job that you did well, right? You don't really want to go, unless it's like a learned experience sort of situation. I hope you're talking about a job that you've done well. And many times, if we're people who have had a career and this is your career change, you know, you're going to have a recommendation from an employer. And so, you know, if you're getting a recommendation from an employer, it's almost implied that you've done a good job in that position that you've held. And this is why when Alyssa and I talk about a personal statement, we're like, what does your application cover? Because if you're not going to have a recommendation from a specific employer and you're going to talk about that in your personal statement, then we might need to add a little bit more context into that job description. But if there's a job description in the resume, you don't need to go so deep in the personal statement. So it really is a balancing of like, okay, here's elements on this part of your application, there's elements in the letters of recommendation, there's stuff in your resume that you've talked about, and really this personal statement is going to be a human part of the resume, or the application. So that's really what we're talking about here, and you don't want to overlap with too many things.
I have two more things to say that I would say to this person. I'm just like on a roll. We have another essay to get to. The first thing I would say is also there's a lot in the essay that they can absolutely, I would suggest delete, where they're saying, like, for example, like a good lawyer does this, or a good attorney would do this. You just don't need to say that. You don't need to make a case for what and that's on the third page. So on the third page, at the top of the third page, that paragraph, it's at the end of the paragraph, things like, as a lawyer, it is important to hear the other side. The admissions committee knows what makes a good lawyer. All of that stuff, it's you don't have to make a case for what you know a good lawyer should be at all. If you talk about yourself, the admissions officer will infer qualities about you that could learn how to be a lawyer. You don't have to be a lawyer yet. You have to be able to learn how to be a lawyer. So there's like this change that happens there. Any sentence like that, start deleting that, start cutting that out. You don't need to say it. As well as there's some cliches in there that I'm not mad about, because this person, Ayaka, put it so beautifully too, how it does all of these extras does a disservice to how powerful this person's story is. So all of these comments are just to clear away the weeds and let this person shine, because this person is incredibly impressive, really powerful stories. But there's a cliche somewhere in here where it says, like, there's nothing more rewarding than, if you were to tell a story from a source of pride, we would infer that that is a rewarding story for you, and you could maybe say, like, that was really interesting, like that was the most interesting part of my job, or that was very like intriguing to me. And then the reader would say, oh, that person finds that rewarding. So you take all those cliches out, take anything that says, as a lawyer, it's important to be, take anything that says, like, in my job, it was important to be, and just focus on yourself, because it's powerful enough.
Yeah. And just to add a comment, you know, we see a lot of times in essays, people are putting in, you know, to be a great attorney, or, you know, I believe that people should be X, Y, and Z, you know, stuff like that. These very general blanket comments, we see them more often than not in an essay. It's, number one, a little weird coming into a personal statement where you're talking about yourself, and then it's like, people should be, or like,
you're talking about like the focus shifts,
right.
like from personal statement should say, I did this happened to me, this was my experience. Oh, I literally have in my notes what you're saying, Ayaka. So there's a repeat of phrases in here where it says it is so important. If this person controlled F and just deleted every sentence that said it is so important following, and then if they had a story to tell about that, then do that. But if you're just kind of, that switch of, Ayaka, sorry, I cut you off because I was excited.
No. But I mean, this is what we talk about all the time. We see it so many times, and every single time it's take it out. It's never doing you any positives.
Show, don't tell.
Yeah.
Show me, don't tell me. And my last note for this is at the very beginning of the personal statement. And Ayaka, this is something I learned from you. The beginning of the personal statement mentions being homeless or like navigating the complexities of the homeless shelter.
Yeah.
That is not a theme throughout the statement. So I have to ask myself, why did this person say it? And I would deduce that this person said it because they want me to know a hardship that they've overcome. They want me to know that they're the real deal, which I get that. And I am a fan of you, whoever wrote this, but there either needs to be, you could write a whole essay on that. Some schools have hardship essays, which, personal note, I have tried to sit down to write a hardship essay and then I just end up in a really bad mood because nothing puts me in a bad mood more than talking about all my hardships. So if anyone out there is listening and they're trying to write a hardship essay, like Ayaka said, give yourself time because it is really difficult to write about this is the hardship I've been through. But anyway, this comes up. They're trying to tell me that they've been through something, but the whole essay loses focus in terms of like the resume talk and then the everything it is important, that sort of like disjointedness of like talking about yourself. Personal statement has to talk about themselves. Delete all those, delete the what an attorney should be. And then this person will be left with personal stories about their race, and about maybe what they did at their job that was the most interesting or intriguing or shows how they're compassionate and an advocate and a hard worker and disciplined. And they could talk about that, but it's displaced. They could talk about them navigating complexities of a homeless shelter. I don't think that has to be deleted, like what I said earlier, but it's not gracefully placed.
I agree. And there's no follow through with it. So either lose it or follow through with it, I think is the comment there. I know we're running on time, but the last comment on this one, the school piece, really hard to read, to be honest. It's really hard. You don't need to repeat the school name over and over again. And it's awkwardly vague enough that if I switched a couple words, I wouldn't know which school this was. So
that was such a brilliant, Ayaka. I'm so glad that I get to work with you because I agree that I agree. And I'm really glad that you brought that part up because it is really hard to talk about a school and talk about a school in an effective way.
Yeah. And I think,
why do you think it's hard to read? Like when you say it's hard, because of the repetitiveness of C unity that I think is C unity. But the school would know. So I'm already anticipating the pushback where they're like, well, the school would know. But I like your point in that you don't have to repeat the school name so much.
Yeah. I mean, the school name came up 6-7 times in one paragraph. That's a lot, number one. Stuff, and this is, it gets into a little bit of word choice, but this just sounds like brown nosing, to be honest.
Well, I think, okay, so, and I know we have to move on, but brown nosing has been on my mind because I was writing an email to an admissions dean to my, like, a school that I absolutely idolize today. And I didn't want to miss the opportunity in terms of how do I not say your school promotes, how do I not make it sound like I could be talking about any school if I just switch a few different words? And how do I make it relevant to what the email was about? And how do I say enough so it looks like I'm invested, but it's also super specific? And it took me an hour to write. I think the email was about 6 lines long. So
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that anybody overthink, because when I say it out loud, it sounds like it's overthinking, but it has to stay on topic with what you're already talking about. It has to show that you are talking about something specific. So if this person, they bring up diversity, and actually I really like the point that this person makes, and I think it gets lost. They bring up that says, where is it?
Is it this one?
Yeah, I've developed, it means there's going to be a different opinion. I've developed a professional tolerance for opinions in which I do not agree. I'm like, that's a super powerful, that is so powerful. And it's actually location wise. So now we said we weren't going to go this deep, but now we're talking about like stage 4 and 5 in terms of, and the same with the homeless shelter mentioned, location wise, it's losing itself in terms of the way you're telling your story, because even location wise, it's in the middle of the paragraph.
Yep.
And so we get like pretty vague school stuff, something really important that the applicant says about themselves, and then pretty vague school stuff below.
Yeah. And that's kind of adding to the difficulty of reading it, because it's like, oh, wait, this is really interesting the way you're saying. But then you're talking about, and from an admissions officer's standpoint, it's okay, you're talking about us. This is interesting stuff that you're talking about yourself, and then you're talking about us again. So,
yes. And you know what? I was raised in the South, and I'm a woman of color. So I'm a woman and I'm a person of color, and I was raised in the South. And so there's a, what is that? What am I trying to say? Like there's a formality that I have to always erase or like forget if I'm speaking to someone on the West Coast or the East Coast. Like, for example, when I got to California for undergrad, I kept saying yes, ma'am, and no, sir. And my professors were like, you got, like, that's so weird. Please stop. But what I'm trying to point out is the word choice here in terms of I admire, I idolize. There is there's a imbalance of when I've actually spoken to admissions officers specifically about language and word choice, and is it ego to try to speak to these people as though you see yourself in the program. Like, I see myself in this program. I want to be in that program, and just kind of talk more of like a peer-to-peer relationship, still not using conjunctions though. It's interesting. And you know, some of the answers that I've gotten back have been really helpful in mentioning that you don't have to create like a bottom, like mindset, or like I idolize or I admire. I'm really at a loss for words here, but some of that language, it's not necessary. And I don't know where this person was raised. I don't know. Do I? I don't think they mentioned it. I'm saying I get it, but it's okay to sort of talk as though like you belong, like they're trying to get you to belong in their community, and then you're going to be an alumni, and you can be a mentor, and you can be an attorney. So a little bit of that language you can let go of as well.
Absolutely. Tons more to talk about. We've got to move on. So I know we spent a lot of time on this, but let's move on. It's a diversity statement. It's a little bit shorter, so bear with me. You're going to hear my voice for a minute or two. On January 12th, 2010, a day I will never forget. At 4:53 p.m., a massive earthquake occurred in my country, Haiti, which not only killed close family and friends, but also destroyed my school and my home. All hopes and dreams were shattered in a matter of seconds. My parents saw that there were no other alternative but to migrate here to the United States. And that's where everything in my life suddenly changes and my journey to America begins. Coming to the United States, I knew things were going to be different, but it was nothing compared to what I have imagined. I have had to adapt to various things such as the culture, language, the food, etc. Along with all those changes, one major experience that totally caught me off guard was me getting bullied by my classmates. Here, I was still trying to fathom how I survived an earthquake and trying to fit in another country. Here, I also was dealing with classmates making fun of me because of where I was from. No sympathy was shown to a poor girl who just experienced such tragedy. I remembered being so weak and helpless. Also, with the language barrier, I could hardly defend myself. Growing up in a religious family was honestly the best thing that had ever happened to me. In the midst of the chaos, my parents would always pray and encourage me to persevere and push me to beat all the obstacles that came my way. Although it took me a couple of years to fully grasp the language, and also being the introvert that I am, I made certain during my first semester in college to speak up. I tried my very best to get involved, participate in skill shops, community service, group projects, etc. I know it was not going to be easy, but I just had to try. I refused to let my weakness hinder me to move forward in my personal and professional life. I said to myself, if I survive an earthquake, overcome language barrier, achieve many accomplishments that brought me thus far, then there is nothing I set my mind to I can't attain. To conclude, I am proud to be Haitian. My roots truly shaped and to molded me to the very confident person that I am today. I'm still learning and still adapting, but who isn't? Life is all about acclimatizing to whether to wherever it takes you. Yes, I was born in one of the poorest countries in the world, but my beautiful country humbles me. It pushes me to work harder each day. Despite of Haiti condition, I strive to always educate as many people as possible to see there is more to my country than what the world portrays it to be.
Okay, I'll try to be quick here. For one thing that just kind of is getting to me is that the very last sentence says that they educate the world on how much more their country can be. But the essay before it was talking about how they personally navigated school bullies and speaking up in school.
Yeah.
So the last sentence is thoughtful, but doesn't match the essay. That's my first thing of feedback because I know we're running out of time. I think this is a great diversity statement topic. So if we were talking about stages, I would say this is definitely maybe like even stage 3, 4, maybe even stage 4. I feel like it's close. And I've actually brought up before to admissions officers, if somebody is not a native English speaker, do they expect English to be perfect? And I got the answer back that no, if you don't have to be a perfect English speaker, especially if you mention it's not your first language, which this person does. So that's what pushes it farther along for me, because I think it's a great topic. I think that this person has thought about structure. But my feedback is that last sentence wraps up a conclusion that didn't happen. And really the other piece of feedback I'd have is that the essay starts out the same way a lot of essays start out, in terms of wherever that person was. If there was something where like a world news event, they start out with the date. And I understand why, but you know what I personally would advise this person to do? I would say, well, where were you when the earthquake happened? It might be more powerful to say, I was in geometry class at 4:53 p.m.
Yeah.
A little bit more takes me to you. And I've read so many essays right now that I personally don't prefer to read on, for example, as an American, on September 11th, 2001. Those dates are not capturing the reader in the way that you want them to. So I would just say, where were you? And start the story out like that.
Yeah. And I think that's great feedback in that the date really means nothing. It means so much to this person. It means nothing to me. And if I close my laptop and said, oh, what do I remember about this person? I wouldn't remember the date, unfortunately. Right.
Yeah, it depends on the worldview, and that's why diversity is good, Ayaka.
Right. No. I think that's the point of like you saying, hey, like if you said I was in geometry class, right, when this happened, it's a little bit more impactful. I might not remember the exact date, but I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, like it happened during the day. you
It
know.
actually it talks, I'm so sorry. I just got excited because you mentioned this in the last essay, speaking in terms of I, and then speaking of like they or it should be, and like this kind of like worldview. That's sort of like a newspaper headline, like the date, but you could start out with that I. And so again, it's like staying focused in terms of who you're talking about. Just say, I was here when this happened.
Yeah. The one point that I have with this essay, and I was squarely put this in a 3, in that I would love to work a little bit more in structure here, to give a little bit more clarity on, so this person talks about the bullying piece, which I think it's a beautiful insight of being a foreigner coming into the United States, and you have to acclimate and all that. Um, there's this other piece that's a little bit floating, the Haitian piece. And I'm like, I understand this bullying piece, like being a foreigner, like, I'm an immigrant as well, so I understand this so well. But I also want to know a little bit, and this is probably just the greedy reader in me that's like, what is the Haitian immigrant experience?
Oh, I see. Okay. Are you suggesting that this person needs to go farther because this could potentially also be, this needs to speak more to Haitian and like specifically
Well,
being of Haitian descent? Excuse me for my abbreviation.
no, no, it's okay. So the reasoning behind it is not because this person is Haitian. The reason behind it is because in that last paragraph, they say, I'm proud to be Haitian. However,
They don't say what that means to
I
them.
don't understand what that means. And not in a rude way, more what is, where is that source of pride? To be
Like, for example, in that last paragraph, when they say, yes, I was born in one of the poorest, by the way, take out the word yes. So I was born in one of the poorest countries in the world, but my beautiful country humbles me, comma. When it says it pushes me to work harder each day, I believe that that's a mistake because you could say humbles me, comma, and explain how, and say, and literally say, comma, for example, and say something about what it means to you. Or you could say it pushes me to work harder each day and tell us a story, and like, why does it push you to work harder each day being Haitian?
Yeah.
It's a little bit of like show us, don't tell us. I think the last paragraph, it looks like this person struggled to sort of like create a conclusion. But I think it's close. And that last sentence doesn't really belong.
I do too. I think the Haitian piece, because it comes in that conclusion, I'm left in my mind, oh, okay, we've talked about this bullying piece, which is interesting, and such a hard experience. I understand the diversity piece there. The last paragraph kind of muddles that point a little bit, and it puts it out of focus. And now I'm wondering, well, we didn't talk about all these great qualities of the Haitian culture and what this person brought to the US as part of their culture and background. So, I understand the focus of the essay wasn't that, which is fine. But if they want to
Yeah.
conclude with something like that, then they're going to need to piece together a little bit more.
Yeah, I would say if anybody is an immigrant and listening to this, I please don't think that you have to prove like what you've brought. Like
No,
that's not, it's,
absolutely not.
you don't have to do that at all. That's just because this person concluded in that way that they were doing that.
Yes.
Uh and my last piece of feedback for the night is it still has to do with the conclusion. That first sentence ends with a question. Don't
Yeah.
put questions in your personal statement. You don't want to do that. Number one, it's this question specifically is too casual. This, but who isn't? It is too casual for your personal statement. For your diversity statement. You want your diversity statement to speak in a professional manner and just be clear and be confident in just regular sentences.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. There's a couple of sentences here and there that's a little bit too casual for me. You could say that's a stylistic choice. But I think there is a line for casualness and professional writing. So, I think this is a great essay, and depending on what this person does with that conclusion, it could be close to the 4, it could be close to the stage 3, but I think it's great. Well, I know we're way over time. Thank you for sticking with us. Alyssa and I can go on and on forever about essays, but we will leave it here. Make sure, if you want your essays reviewed, or if you want help with essays, please reach out at admissions@lsatunplugged.com. We're there answering emails all the time.
And we may or may not be doing a special thing for course members. So go ahead and give us an email, and I hope everyone has a good night.
Yep. Have a good night. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.